start with a little bit of your personal background, talk about where you grew up and how you grew up and, your time in college. And I believe that you spent a couple of years as a pastor
Yes.
before you went to Vietnam. I'd like to talk a little bit about your decision to join the Army Reserves. Like, why would you join the Army Reserves at a time when, we were at war? And then once you became activated and you went to Vietnam, I've read your. I did not get to read Combat Trauma because Combat Chaplains was longer than I thought it would be. So, but I have read that. Um, and then I'll ask you some questions about your experience in Vietnam. Um, and then I'd kind of like to get into life since the war, um,
Sure. Yeah.
and particularly the things that you've been involved in since the war ended, or since the war ended for you, the things that you've been involved in that are relevant to Vietnam veterans. Um, and that should probably cover it. Is there anything you feel like I've left out there? Anything that you want me to ask you about in particular?
No, I think that's exactly the road that would be appropriate to take.
Okay.
I'll deal some with PTSD and how that has impacted so many of us, and as well as the uh, anything that in between you want to ask me or.
Okay. Okay. And where are you located? Are you in North Carolina?
Yeah, I live in Fayetteville, North Carolina, which is adjacent to Fort Bragg.
Yeah. And have you lived in Fayetteville a long time?
Since I retired from the Army. I retired from the Army in 1986, and I'd had two different assignments at Fort Bragg, and after the last one, I decided, or we decided, my wife and I, to stay, and we already had our home here, so that.
Mm.
I'm originally from North Carolina. Grew up in a town called Albemarle, North
Mhm.
Carolina. It's about 2 hours west of here, near the Charlotte area.
Mhm.
Uh,
Well, I grew up in Columbia, South Carolina, so I know that area well.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so when you were growing up in Albemarle, at what point in your upbringing did you first feel like you were called to to the church?
I think I was probably feeling that by the time I was about in the eighth or ninth grade. And as I progressed through high school, I had more and more of a feeling that I wanted to do ministry of some sort. Uh, and of course, I was careful in selecting the college that I wanted to go to. I played football, and I was a pretty good football player. I was an all-state lineman, and so I had a number of opportunities of playing different schools. But uh, I settled on Wake Forest because I liked the religion department there. Some of the others, like University of South Carolina there in Columbia, I had an offer there. The Citadel,
Mm.
University of Tennessee, Davidson, all those were and others were good schools, but I wanted to have a good background in my undergraduate, and so I chose Wake Forest. And as I progressed through, uh, I began more and more having a sense of Army chaplaincy or the military chaplaincy. I hadn't settled on the Army at that point, and so that became my goal. And
Hmm.
you know,
Does it run in the family? Was anybody in your family in the ministry, or is it?
no, no, there's never been anybody uh, in ministry. That's just uh, what happened to me.
Yeah. What about military? Any military in your family?
No, 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 no. I had an uncle in World War II,
Mm.
the Navy, but he was drafted. But there was no, and I really don't. It could have been. I made a trip to the Citadel. They flew me down there. First time I ever flew in an airplane, in fact. And I changed planes in Columbia, South Carolina. But I spent a weekend there. And of course, that's a military school. And I decided that I did not want to go to a military school, but it sort of planted some seeds for me that the military might be a fit for me at some point in the future.
Mm. So when you finished at Wake Forest, what year was that?
I graduated from Wake Forest in 1962. I immediately went on to seminary, and in fact, I graduated one week and started my summer classes the next week. And so worked pretty hard during those 2.5 years. It's normally a 3-year program, but I was able to graduate soon because I went year round. And during that time, I joined the reserves and went through that process of joining the reserves. And I I was not eligible to become a chaplain, but I could become what was and is called a staff specialist. And I won't go into the details about that. That's sort of a precursor to becoming a chaplain.
Hmm.
During my last year of seminary, during the summer, I went to the chaplain's basic course at Fort Hamilton, New York. That was for 9 weeks. And of course, by the time I finished that, I was hooked on the fact that I really wanted to go into the Army. And this was pretty much pre-Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
It was just beginning to, get a little bit of news about that. But I was just attracted to being doing ministry with soldiers. And of course, I knew that I would have to have some experience. The requirement was that you have a minimum of 2 years experience, either as a chaplain or, I'm sorry, as a pastor or something of that nature. And I'd had a student pastorate the last 2 years I was in seminary. And then I went for another 1.5 years to full-time pastorate after seminary. And while I was there that, that I was called active duty. That's in 1966.
I'm curious, what is it about soldiering that uh, why that focus for your ministry? Why do you think you were drawn to that?
I could not answer that. I thought about that a lot of times over the years. Uh, the but I really cannot answer that specifically. It was a challenge, and it could have been that maybe an ulterior motive was over the fact that that I could join the Army and travel. I'd never been able. My folks were very poor. My dad was a mill worker and agriculture, and so I may have figured, hey, if I can do ministry with soldiers, that means I can live and go in different places.
Well, you sure did. So, uh, so you joined the Army Reserves, and then at what point did they activate you to full-time active duty?
I was activated in the spring of 1966. Received orders for Fort Knox, Kentucky, and whereas I had made some very significant relationships in the church field, it was time to move on, and so we moved to Fort Knox, Kentucky. And it was that year I served as a reception station chaplain. This was where, of course, keep in mind, this was when the draft was going hard and heavy. And this was the first week that soldiers would get off the bus, and they would draw their gear and have some orientations before they went across the street for basic training. And so I gave a lecture every day sort of to introduce them to what chaplains were, what they could expect spiritually, during their time of in the year, and I really loved it. Really loved it. Although I knew I would only be there for a year, and so while I was there, uh, I decided that whenever I was whenever I was given orders to go to Vietnam, that I wanted to get into the field. I didn't want to go into say a signal unit or a transportation unit or anything like that. I wanted to go to where the infantry was, and so I had a supervisor of mine to contact the folks in Vietnam and say, "Hey, Johnson's coming. He wants to be in an infantry division," and so that's what I did. I ended up going to the Ninth Infantry Division and was assigned to a battalion down in the Mekong Delta. And little did I know what I was getting into, but it's where I should have been, needed to be, and was called to be.
Mm. What do you remember most vividly about arriving there?
I remember getting off of the airplane and how oppressively hot it was and humid. And
Mhm.
of course, I
And
was
you and I come from hot and humid, but you know,
yes, yes, sure do. But uh, I think the humidity was greater whenever I went over in June, and it was the
mm,
season. It was not had not rained in a while, and I just remember landing. It was in the middle of the night, and it was probably around midnight. And golly, was it hot and oppressive. Um, so that was the first impression.
mm. Was there a moment when at what point did you realize that you were in the right place, that you were where you should have been?
I think that that probably came about 3 or 4 days after I arrived there. I stayed in the processing center for about 3 days. Then I went to the division headquarters, which was nearby, and my division chaplain loaded me up on a helicopter, and it was on a Sunday. He had 4 or 5 services that he just wanted me to dovetail with him, and I did. And we landed in a number of different places, for a short service, and just been able to interact just for a short period of time with some of the soldiers that confirmed, hey, I'm where I need to be.
Mm. How challenging is it? I mean, I'm assuming that, that one chaplain has to serve men of many different faiths and denominations within those faiths. How do you deal with that?
Once
Uh,
one, uh, once I got to my battalion, uh, that's true. I was the only one in the battalion, and Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, and those who did not believe. They were all my people. They were all my soldiers. And what I tried to do was to have a ministry of presence. My goal, whenever I first got there, was to go to every unit and be around and be seen every day. We were not actually on combat operations for the first 2 or 3 weeks after I got there. So we were preparing. The units were preparing. So I got to know a lot of the guys right away. And of course, they in turn, many of them sought me out, for counseling. Many of them simply wanted to go home, and of course, that was beyond my purview to get them home. But I could listen to them, and I did. I did a lot of listening and a lot of support, and so that was pretty much my first 2 or 3 weeks there.
sure. And when you're conducting these services, I know that uh, Catholic services, for example, tend to have a different kind of structure than Protestant services. How do you create a service? How do you architect a service for people who come from all different versions of faith?
I basically took the gospel as I saw it and understood it, and whatever scriptures that I would use, I use those in a sense of hey, anybody who wants to be a part of prayers and interpretations of the scriptures, then you're welcome. I never, of course, I couldn't do a Catholic mass. I couldn't, uh, uh, be a rabbi. But once we got motivated in the field and started, actual combat operations, uh, well, actually, I did not have a lot of services in the field. There
Right.
was not the opportunity, but occasionally I could. And then when we would come in for like 2 days or 3 days, I would. And I found that the guys, whereas they still identified as Catholic or Jewish or whatever, it really didn't matter to them that they at that particular point in time they had the opportunity of being uh, uh, in a service. Now, I also was able to recruit a Catholic priest at the brigade headquarters periodically to come in and do a mass. Uh, Never was able to get a Jewish rabbi there because there were only a few in the whole country. And so, we collaborated to try to make sure that everybody was covered.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah, so I want to get to so those the combat operations in a minute, but first, there was one thing in your book that surprised me. Well, there were many things in your book that surprised me. One of them was the fact that men would come to you in the hopes that you could help them get reassigned, and you describe, in some places, feeling like they were trying to manipulate you. I guess my question is, um, what influence did you have over potential reassignment, and what were some of the ways that they tried to manipulate that?
Well, not everyone who came was trying to manipulate, but some did, and significant numbers did because they saw me perhaps as a in a position of authority or power, and uh, so. But I guess the key word was love. I tried to love these guys. I tried to be where they were. I tried to let them know that I was empathetic, and and that was one of the reasons, by the way, I guess that reinforced that I needed to go to the field on all the operations, which I did. And if they knew I was there, saw that I was there, that not that I had any miraculous powers to protect them, which I did not, of course. But if the chaplain is in the field with me, then perhaps I'll just have to accept the fact that I'm here for the duration.
Right. Was it just the fact that you were a captain, or was there some other? And forgive me because I don't know how this works. Does a chaplain have any influence over trying to get someone reassigned?
Could, but in those circumstances, it was never wise to do that. If a person on the verge of breaking, and I thought that, then my course of action would be to go to the first sergeant and the company commander and say, "Hey, this guy is on the edge," and maybe let him pull KP as kitchen police in the mess hall for a week or 10 days, and then go back out. Just give him a break. But no, as far as reassignment, no.
I
Uh,
see. Yeah. Interesting. So, you wrote in your book that you were the second youngest chaplain on active duty. You were 25 years old.
yes. Mhm.
And it also seemed to me from reading the book that you spent an unusual amount of time for a chaplain in combat operations. Do you think there's a link there? I mean, is it one of the reasons why you were more likely or more you had a greater appetite for combat situations was because you were so young relative to the other chaplains, or was there some other reason?
I think that probably a good part. That's it. I was younger. Now I'd been to school and I'd had a lot of experience. I started college early. I was 17, so therefore I finished early. And soon after I got there, I had a birthday. But I was, to those guys, I think they probably looked at me as an old man, end quote.
Mhm.
but but I was still young, and they didn't know how old a chaplain was supposed to be because they'd never been around a chaplain.
Mhm. It seems like they were surprised that you were in some of the situations you were in,
Yeah,
right
yeah,
alongside them.
yeah. They were, and of course, like I said, I went out on every one of our combat operations, every one of them, and the I would rotate. I would go out like with a company, and I would try to maneuver with one platoon, and then whenever I could switch off to another platoon. And then the next operation, I would go out like with our B company, and then it got to where if one company had been hit especially hard, that's the company I would go out with on the next combat operation, because there were always a lot of new guys there who had come in as replacements, as well as the ones who survived the battle. Uh, I couldn't be all places at one time, but I tried to be visible, and I tried to maneuver around, and I was pretty darn successful with that. And of course, I didn't carry a weapon. I never carried a weapon. I was not there to shoot people. I was there to minister in whatever way I possibly could, and that did not go unnoticed by the soldiers.
Yeah, there was a was it Her was I forget his name, was it Hirschberger who said,
Yeah,
"Chaplain, you're everywhere."
yeah. And
Yeah.
still, I'm still in touch with his mother. His mother's 96 years old, lives in Norfolk, Virginia. In fact, I've been to see her and spent some time with her and his two sisters up there. And he had written to her about me, and of course he was unfortunately later killed. And but yeah, David Hirschberger, he was a unique guy, and I had a good relationship with him as well as a lot of others.
Yeah, he seemed really appreciative that, everywhere he was, you were there too. Um, one of the things that struck me in reading your accounts of, firefights and battles and combat situations was once they were over, uh, I mean, you've had this, during the firefight, you had the same experience as everyone else, except of course as a non-combatant. But you were dodging bullets just the same as everybody. Um, you were trying to help, you know, uh, with the wounded as much as anybody. But then when things were over, and everybody else had a chance to sort of exhale, that's sort of when your work really began. Like, you didn't get to unwind after the bullets stopped flying. You had to run around and attend to the wounded and in some cases, deal with people who were killed in action. Um, you know, I just wonder how you kept going. I mean, it seems like there must have been moments when everybody else just sort of shut down for a minute and kind of recharged, and you didn't really get as much opportunity to do that because that was when
No,
you would go around and visit everybody or fly to a surgical hospital or
yeah, uh, yeah. To a large degree, you're right about that. Not what I would do, of course, we would usually be out about 3 days at a time, sometimes a day or two more, sometimes less. But my first objective was to get some hot food, and get a few hours sleep. And then I would hit the road. I mean, I'd go to the helipad and and hitchhike a ride out to our division headquarters there. I would get someone, usually one of the chaplain's assistants there with the Jeep to take me around to Saigon, to Long Beach, some of the other hospitals. And then it was back on the, I would get another chopper, fly back to the base camp or back to the ship where we were, or wherever we happened to be. And if it was near a Sunday, on a Sunday, I would try to work in a service. And of course, I think one of the most important things that I did, I was able to go to each first sergeant and company commander and say, hey, you had 6 guys wounded, and here's here's their status. You know, this guy and this guy, in about a week, he'll be back. But this other fellow is going to be medevaced to Japan or to the States or something of that nature. So they had a pretty good handle on that. Likewise, after a little while, the soldiers who were left there, they wanted to know about how is so and so, or did you see somebody else? And
Mhm.
I was probably the only direct link that they had with their buddies who had been wounded.
Was that unusual? Was that unusual for a chaplain to be that sort of conduit for that sort of information?
Uh, you know, I don't know. I couldn't say one way or the other about that.
Hmm.
Uh,
You know, you talked about your first objective after you came back in from a combat operation was to get some food and some sleep. There, it's, I mean, I've found several times in your book where you thought that you were going to get some food and some sleep, but then you found that somebody needed to talk, and so you did
yeah,
that instead.
yeah. It was seldom that I could put myself first. I mean, if a soldier had gotten a Dear John letter from home or had not received a letter in a while, I mean, he was 10,000 miles from home. He couldn't run and get a telephone and call and see what the situation is. And so, I tried to be a listening presence, and sometimes I could offer ways in which they could sort of bridge the gap, and occasionally I would write a letter in their behalf to a girlfriend or a wife or in some cases a parent, and say, hey, it's important to get mail over here. And of course, unfortunately, the mail had a turnaround time of about 12 or 14 days by the time you wrote a letter, got it out to uh, Columbia, South Carolina, say, and then your wife or girlfriend wrote back. It was usually another 6 to 8 days before that letter came back. And so it was not before the days of cell phones and computers and such stuff as we have today.
Yeah, yeah. Back in the days when a piece of paper had to be delivered
Yeah.
on the other side of the world, sure. Um, you mentioned that there were a couple of times in the book where you talked about GIs who suddenly felt some urgent need to get married, and in some cases it was that their girlfriend back home was pregnant and they wanted to go home and get married before the baby was born. But there were other cases where, or at least one other case I can remember in the book where a GI wanted to marry a Vietnamese girl
Yeah. Mhm.
and came to you about that. And one thing that wasn't clear, or maybe I just missed it in the book, was, was that GI asking you to perform the ceremony?
No,
Would you?
not no, no, not usually. They just wanted to get married, and usually these were not GIs who were in the field. Most of them were support people who would go into the village and do who knows what, and
Mm,
which they weren't supposed to do, but they would quote fall in love end quote because
mm,
they had a little bit of tender love and care, and so therefore they thought that uh, they wanted to get married and live happily ever after once they could get out of Vietnam and bring their bride with them. But of course, in most cases, that was very, very unrealistic.
got it. Got it. Did you perform any weddings in
No,
Vietnam?
no,
No.
no.
Okay. All right. Well, if it's all right with you now, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the combat
Yeah.
experience. And I'm not really interested in having you repeat some of the really harrowing accounts that you've already written about very vividly in the book. But I am interested in exploring sort of the ethical terrain. I mean, it must be. I mean, that is a unique situation to be a non-combatant, and particularly a member of the clergy, in situations where bullets are flying and people are being killed. Um, there must have been times when you were tempted to pick up a weapon.
There was never really a time that I was tempted to do that. I was trained before I ever left Fort Knox. Uh, I was trained to use an M16, to use a 9 millimeter. Now this was not on my records because it's non-combatant, but I wanted to be ready. My fear uh, was that if and by the way, most of the time the company commanders wanted me to take a weapon. I wouldn't do it, of course, because that would I thought send the wrong message. What I thought was if we ever to the point of being about to be overrun by the enemy, there would be enough people who had fallen, enough weapons available that I could grab one and defend myself. And I would have. I never, got to that point though. There were a few times I wasn't sure of what was going to happen. It wasn't in almost all firefights. You didn't know could not anticipate what was going to happen. But I, I felt uh, comfortable with being with my guys. They weren't there to protect me. They were there to protect everybody. And, so as a team, we were sort of like uh, an extended squad. But as far as the moral implications, the spiritual part of that, they, uh, sure, there were times when raise a question of, well, where's God? Where's God in the midst of all this chaos? Uh, I could say it was a miracle that I was not shot. It was a miracle that I was not killed, and I could recount uh, numerous times that I came close. But if I say it was a miracle that I was saved, how am I going to deal with the question of what about the guys who did get it, who were shot, who were killed? Uh, uh, the bad things happen to good people, no doubt about that. But to this day, I've never been able to completely rationalize where God is in the insanity that we call war. And war is insane. When you get a group of people out here with weapons, and there's another group of people over there with weapons, and they're trying to kill each other, that's about as insane as it gets. And yet, as far as the GI and as far as my role there, uh, that was out of our purview. I mean, other people made those decisions as to what was going to happen. And so the moral dilemma for me centered around I can't answer these questions, but what I can do is love my soldiers, and I did my very best to love them and let them know that they were loved. And and I think for the most part I was successful in it.
Yeah, I also think in your book you show and probably not surprising, but remarkable amount of compassion for the enemy as well, right? I mean, those are also God's children who are being killed.
Yep, yep, yep. And of course, if it's one of them versus one of my guys, I knew what side I was on.
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
but the when you, especially when you see these guys who are dead, enemy that we had killed, and thinking, hey, they have probably a wife or a girlfriend, or they might have children. They have parents, brothers and sisters, just like I do. And so, that always touched me, even after we'd had a bad knockdown and drag out fight where we'd had a number of our soldiers killed and many others who were wounded. But they're human beings too.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for your book. It was the first time that I not only had a chance to understand the experience of a chaplain in Vietnam. It was also my first really in-depth exposure to riverine operations,
Yeah.
which I hadn't read much about, and that's a special kind of situation to be on those boats on those rivers. Have you talked with other chaplains who served in Vietnam, and been surprised at how the degree to which your experiences are different from the other chaplains you've talked to?
Yes, I have. I've talked to a number of them over the years, and some went out in the field like I did. How much I don't know. Some did not. Some took the approach that my job is to be at the age center, uh, where these guys were brought in. Well, we didn't have that. That was World War II and Korea uh, uh, philosophy, where there was a front line, and there would be a battalion aid station behind the line. Well, we didn't have lines. We didn't have skirmish lines. We'd go out and have combat operation, and then pack up and come back in, fly back in, or float back in. And uh, so I couldn't be but at one place at a time. But some of the guys, though, they followed the old tradition, and they stayed at the uh, uh, at one of the hospitals or the base camp, wherever that might be. And I don't criticize any of them for that. I just say, hey, they were doing what they felt that they needed to do, and I was doing what I felt that I was needing to do. And I wouldn't say that I was unique. Uh, I would say that I did what I felt that I was called to do, and I tried my best to do that.
Mm. You had a wife and two children at home at the time. Um, I believe that's correct, isn't it?
That's right. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Um, so that calling must have been very powerful for you, given what you had at stake.
Well, it was very powerful, and of course my wife was on board too. Of course, none of us could foresee what was going to happen, what we were going to be exposed to, but she was behind me 100%. She's a wonderful woman, and in fact, we just passed our on the fourth day of this month our 60th wedding anniversary, and she's a wonderful woman, and but she was responsible for the kids. I left a 10-month-old son and a 2.5-month-old daughter with her for the year, and of course that was very difficult for me. It was probably in a lot of ways more difficult for me than it was for her, because I didn't. I mean, if they got the mumps, I didn't know it. Not until 10 days later, and and I couldn't call them. They couldn't call me, and but we just were both intent. Hey, this is going to get better, and it did get better.
Hmm. Well, let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about your exit from Vietnam and coming back home to the States. Um, what were the what were kind of the big priorities first of all, when did that happen and how did it happen? And what were your big priorities when you returned?
Well, let me back up before I'll get into that, but let me back up just a little bit. So there's no misunderstanding about what it, the 8.5 months, with my infantry soldiers. These were guys who were most of them between 19 and 21 years old, just barely out of high school. Uh, you know, having to go through all of the stuff that they did. We normally put out about 375 guys in the field at one time. And during my 8.5 months, I had 96 of my guys killed, and over 900 were wounded. We couldn't have replacements come in fast enough to be fully fit. And put it in today's uh, comparison, we have a lot of mass shootings these days. Some gunman will go in a grocery store or a theater or some other place and shoot the place up, and that's horrible. But what we did, we had mass shooting after mass shooting after mass shooting after mass shooting. Um, I personally was in 22 different firefights. Well, what does that do to a young man who is 19 or 20 or 21 years old? What did it do to me? What did I bring back? With that, the um, what did we come back with after we'd seen dead bodies, not only of the enemy but of our buddies that we would load on to into body bags, and couldn't mourn their loss, could not attend a wake. We did have memorial services, but those were brief, 20 or 25 minutes, and then it was, hey, gear up, we're going back out in 20 minutes or an hour or two. I mean, it was basically what it did that we brought home was it put our soul. It was sort of like having an emotional blown engine, for all of us, and we didn't know that at the time. We had no way of knowing what that was all about. So when we always, not all we thought about, but much of what we thought about was being able to get away from this hellhole and go home to what is normal. But what we did not realize, I did not realize, that there was no normal that we were coming back to. Nothing had changed at home, but everything had changed, with me. And I'm speaking, for my soldiers as well. And of course, to come home and people would say, well, what was it like in Vietnam? But you couldn't talk, they wouldn't listen. I mean, they didn't want to hear, what do you say to people? Well, I lost 96 of my guys killed. Nobody wants to hear that. And so as a result, and I get a lot into that, I get a whole lot into that in my the combat trauma book. But nobody has had the desire to hear or listen to what we should have or could have said. So as a result, I developed sort of a bunker mentality. I was two people. I was one person. I was a good husband, a good father, a good friend, a good son. But there was another part of me that nobody knew, not even my wife. And so when we came home, I realized that in some parts of my life, I had to shut down, or at least try to shut down. Simply to bottle a lot of my feelings up. There were a lot of holes in my soul, Because I was, I mean, hey, I'm still only 27, or I guess 26 or 27 whenever I got home. I'm still young, but I had seen so much death and destruction and havoc and all that I didn't know how to process that. Didn't have anybody to process it with. The government pretty much said to everybody who came back, shut up and get on about your business. Leave that behind. Well, what about having had 10 or 15 mass shootings? Uh, Shut up and forget all that? No, you can't. Well, you can shut up, and most of us did for many, many years. But fortunately, I still had a strong, strong sense of calling that I could focus on. Many of my buddies, my combat brothers, did not have that. I had a strong sense of family, my wife and my two little kids, and we had uh, twin boys born the next year after I came back. So I was busy in the Army at Fort Bliss, Texas, trying to maintain my own equilibrium. And I think I did a good job doing that. But so coming home uh, uh, in some areas really felt like I was displaced. Felt like, as I said, I was living two different lives, and I never said a whole lot to Barbara about what I experienced. And I had written in a lot of detail in letters what had happened, but it was still difficult for her to grasp what all I had been through. So I just shut it down for 25 years. Now, I will say this, whenever I got to Fort Bliss, a lot of people there had been to Vietnam, but that was an air defense post. And most of those people had not been through what I had been through because I was with the infantry, and there's a huge, huge difference in infantry. So I didn't have even anybody there that I could talk to. So what I did, Michael, I started writing. I didn't write a book, but I got legal pads, and at least once a day, whenever I'd get the feelings of some of these so-called demons that were inside, emotional demons, I'd simply start writing. I'd let these thoughts and feelings go from my mind down through my arm, through the pen, onto a piece of paper. Didn't try to write in sentences. I just wrote in thoughts. And I have in fact, I still have that stack of legal pads. It's about 7 or 8 inches deep. And uh, and Barbara periodically would say, well, do you mind if I read what you're writing? I said, no, I don't mind, but wait, I'll let you read this later. Well, we waited for 25 years. And whenever I finally decided that it was time to do something with all those thoughts and writings, that's whenever I started converting that into a book. And that's when I was able to let Barbara in on some of the stuff that I had stuffed. I didn't do it. I didn't do it maliciously or secretively. I guess I just did not want to wound her with my emotional wounds. And so here I guess I'm rambling a little bit, but but whenever I came home, I decided to stay in the Army, and I'm glad that I did. And my exhausted spirit gradually began to get some relief. But I knew that there was a lot wrong with me. I didn't know what it was. I now know it was post-traumatic stress disorder. Of course, post-traumatic stress disorder, the term was not even coined until 1981. in World War One, it was called what, Soldier's Heart. No, I guess that was Soldier's Heart, I believe it was, and combat fatigue and other kinds of things. But to be exposed to trauma continually, uh, whatever label you want to put on it, is very, very, very real. And so, as a result, uh, I wrote that book, and then, but I realized that there was more that I needed to say. In the meantime, I a number of my brothers had contacted me. Well, 20 years after I came back, my battalion had a 20-year reunion, and so I went to that reunion in Colorado Springs, and that was the first time that almost any of us had been in contact with anybody else who had been there. And there were about 100 of us who gathered, and I was really, really nervous about going, as strange as that may sound. And but I told my wife, I said, now, well, we flew into Colorado Springs. I rented a car, and I said, if I ever during this time say we need to go, I said, no questions, we're going. Well, that sounds a little bit strange, I guess, to some people who had not been there, but it was not like that at all. I mean, as soon as I walked in to the little hospitality room we had at that hotel, guys started coming up to me and, hey, you're Chaplain Johnson, and man, it was like in no time I was back 20 years, and as a result, that has been a wonderful, wonderful experience for me to be in contact over the years again with so many of these guys, and they many of them have consulted with me by email, telephone. Few have even come to visit with me in trying to figure out their own PTSD, their own what they can do about it, what they should do about it, what the VA can do for them. And by the way, the VA early on did not do a very good job of helping to manage the emotional wounds that most of us had. In recent years, though, it's my experience that they have come a very long way and being more than willing to try to help any of the veterans. And but anyway, like I said, I was basically living two lives. One, I was very successful, in what I did. I was successful in my ministry and the different units that I had ended up serving in. But the other life, Michael, nobody saw. Nobody saw the things that would trigger me, the things that would cause flashbacks or splashes of deep, sometimes bitter feelings that I would have. But they didn't come out where other people saw them, but I felt them. The waking up in the middle of the night and suddenly is back in Vietnam. Uh, uh, but anyway, that was a lot of feelings that I had, and finally, I don't remember if I mentioned this in my book or not, but I went to the VA, decided that it was time that I get some help, and so I went to the VA, was hooked up with some folks who were able to help me. And I eventually was sent to the VA Medical Center in the Batavia, New York, which is near Buffalo. And I spent a month there with 12 other combat veterans. And that was a wonderful, wonderful experience for me in getting a handle. And so as a result, I feel like I've been able to help a lot of other veterans who sort of have been and continue to be trapped in their past. And so all that led to the second book that I have made mention to you, the Combat Trauma book.
Right.
Um, So uh, thanks for the help of the help of the VA. Thanks for the reconnections that I have had over the years. And thanks for the Vietnam Memorial Wall, the healing wall, and ever since the word. All of us who have been to that wall have our own experiences. And I've been to it, the one in Washington, 4 or 5 times, or maybe 6. I've been to the traveling wall at least on 2 different occasions. Without fail, that there are epiphanies that occur for me whenever I'm there. Part of the time, it is with uh, just being there and seeing the names and reflecting. But a part of the time has to do with others who were there, some who were not combat veterans at all, some were never in service, who might start a conversation with me, and I've had some really dynamic experiences, and folks who would talk to me right there on the incline, uh, uh, and so they get a grasp that these names on this wall are not just names; they were real people with whose lives were cut short, and it's not something that's in a movie.
Mm. I just want to make sure I have the timeline correct. So you came home and you went to a 20-year reunion, and that was and in that 20-year interval, you just tried to get on with things, and the reunion with your comrades was after 20 years. Is that right?
Yes, it was after 20 years, and that started.
And where in the timeline is the first book? I'm trying to figure out, like, was it reunion book
It
and
was
then
reunion and then book. The reunion was in 1996,
hmm,
and the book was published in 2001. The first book was in 2000.
okay. And when did you go to Batavia?
Oh, it was after I retired this last time. That was probably about 2008, 2007, somewhere along
Okay.
there. Um,
And
uh,
then combat trauma followed that
yeah,
experience.
yeah. And that was published in 2010 or 2011.
Mm, mm. I'm curious about the 20-year period between coming home and going to that reunion. Um, you talked about living 2 lives. Um, but even in your overt life, the one that you talk about as being successful in terms of career and family and all the things that people could see, that experience in Vietnam must have informed how you approached even the visible parts of your life, right? It must have shaped your ministry in some way, right? You can't be it's hard for me to imagine that you could completely suppress all of that. It must have come out in some way in terms of how you approached, ministry or fatherhood.
Certainly, in fact, uh, I don't think there's probably not been 10 days since I left Vietnam that something has not come up in my mind or my feeling level about Vietnam. I mean, every day. The saying is, when did you leave Vietnam? Or no, when were you in Vietnam? Last night.
Hmm.
And in a lot of ways that is true, but a lots of things have had and still trigger thoughts. I mean, I went to Israel in 19, must have been about 1972. I saw the remnants of the 1967 war that they had. And, there were tracked vehicles blown up beside the road and so forth. And even though they were not fighting then, just seeing that, triggered a lot of my feelings. But I learned to categorize that type of stuff, Michael. I realized that even though, yeah, I was in Vietnam last night, still it was a long time ago. And, uh, you know, God has given me the grace to be able to keep certain things in certain pockets of my life. And I think I've done a pretty darn good job at it. Occasionally, stuff would spew up, but it has never gotten me in trouble. It's never caused the kind of disruption that would affect negatively other people. And I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that, well, I have said for many, many years that any experience can be a good experience, even if it's a bad experience. Well, that's not just a play on words. I had some bad experiences over there. But I feel like in having a developed an appreciation for life, the value of life. Uh, uh, Golly, a lot of people do not have an appreciation for life the way I think that I do. 7 of my years in the Army, I spent in medical centers. 4 years at Fort Sam Houston at Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, and 3 years at Womack Army Medical Center here at Fort Bragg. Well, I work with death and dying all the time. Of course, I saw lots of tragic things, accidents, automobile accidents, training accidents, and so forth. And I think that what my experiences were in Vietnam, in a way that I am not able to totally explain, assisted me in continuing to deal with people who were facing traumatic situations, heart transplants, or cancer, or COPD, or stuff that would be altering their life, as well as the dependents, spouses and children and so forth. So, I feel good about having been able to use a lot of what I experienced over there to simply try to continue to help other people.
Hmm. What would you like to say about the second book? Because we haven't talked very much about the second book. What would you like to say about why you wrote that, and what have been the consequences of having published that book? Good or bad.
Well, of course, as I went through my journey of post traumatic stress disorder, uh, a lot of my, well, let me put it this way: I do not know of a single combat brother, infantry combat brother, who does not suffer from PTSD. And many, including myself, were in denial. Hey, there's nothing wrong with me. What's wrong with you? Sort of that kind of attitude. When you could see maybe drinking had become a problem, maybe spouse abuse had become a problem, uh, inability to hold a job, uh, detachment from their offspring, things of that nature. And so the more I got to in a situation where I could help these guys, and these were not just guys in my unit, but other combat veterans too. Uh, I realized that there was so much unknown out there about this disorder, and so once I had accepted the fact that I have it, I've done some. I've continued to do something about it, and I'll have it the rest of my life. Is there some way that I can help uh, other people that I have not even met? And so that's when it was sort of revealed to me that I need to maybe go to the computer again, start writing. So I did. And I took the lives of 15 of my combat brothers, people I knew, nobody just off the wall. Most of them were in my unit, but there were some in some sister units. and one was a Navy river rat that I know very well. And so what I basically did with that book, I took the symptoms of PTSD and made a chapter out of each one of these. There was a chapter on guilt, a chapter on anger, sleep problems, etc. And so I basically told the story of all 16 of us. And, and I had them to write a lot of stuff about their own experiences. And I talked to them extensively by telephone and by email. And so I was able to put that book together, and the name just sort of came: Combat Trauma: A Personal Look at Long-Term Consequences. And so my literary agent out there where you are in California, in La Jolla, California, she found a publisher that published this book. It's an international publisher. And as a result of that, I'm not bragging about this, but it's a statement of fact that it has, in a lot of ways, become a template by a lot of people in the VA system, who work with combat veterans. Mm. And I've had people contact me who have read this book. Well, one person was from Israel. He was writing about the trauma of a lot of the Israeli soldiers, and he contacted me. We had a number of conversations back and forth because he wanted to understand this better, so that was a spillover. There was another guy who was writing his PhD dissertation on this from University of Southern Mississippi. In fact, he flew out here and spent 2 days with me, just talking with me, because he wanted to better understand that. Now, he was not a veteran, but he was writing in behalf of people who had various kinds of trauma in their lives. And because trauma is trauma, whether it's from gunshots and B-40 rockets and stuff like mortars or whatever, whether it's from that or if it's from significant child abuse, etc. And so that's sort of the parts that sort of have fallen together for me in writing that book. And
And what year did you say that you were? Excuse me, I'm having some technical issues here. What year did you say that you retired?
I retired from the Army in 1996. No, I'm sorry. 1986. And then I went back to school, got my doctorate in marriage and family, and I did marriage and family therapy until 2005. And that's when these emotional demons were beginning to get worse. The last probably 3 years before I retired, it was really, and this was before I sought individual help for myself. Fatigue became a real thing with me. I'd come home from work, and I would just hit the sofa, and I'd have to lie there for an hour or two just to get enough energy up to, finish my day and night. And I had a number of experiences that would bring these PTSD symptoms up, to the surface. And so that, along with the fact that I developed kidney cancer and was going to have a right kidney removed, made me decide, hey, it's time to retire, which I did. And so as I had a tough time with that surgery. In fact, that went on for 6 weeks. I won't get into that, but I was out of commission emotionally and physically for a while after 2005. But it was during that time that I decided that I need more treatment, and so that's whenever I went to Batavia. And so as a result of all this, the formulation of this combat trauma book was coming together in my mind, and so I started putting some things together, and I told my wife, I said, I don't know where this is going to go, but I'm going to start writing some stuff, and I did, and kept crafting it, and so lo and behold, it was published, and I'm grateful that, and all the profits from from both of these books go to Wounded Warrior Project. I've never received any funds, for myself. I mean, I don't need to. God's blessed me, and financially in a lot of different ways, and so I never see any of the money. For example, from Roman Littlefield, my publisher, it never, none of that money, those royalties ever come to me. It goes through a channel to get to Wounded Warriors.
And are you actively involved now in your after your second retirement? Are you working with Wounded Warrior Project, or is there still are you still involved with helping Vietnam veterans in particular?
Only as requested.
Mm.
I do not. I'm not very active with anything like that now. Well, part of it is physical. I have a severe neuropathy, so I have some mobility issues. But well, just about 10 days ago, I received a call from a woman in California, Oxnard, California. Is an Oxnard, anyways, somewhere out there. Her brother was one of the river rats, and he died back in April. And on the 6th of February of '68, we had a guy who did the unthinkable, throwing himself on a grenade, a live grenade, and of course it blew up, and he saved some of his squad members. And so I went out with 2 medics and another guy and helped bring him back to the aid boat. And we sent him off. Well, he ended up getting the Medal of Honor. Well, this lady was telling me that her brother was the other fellow who went out to help bring him, to the aid boat so we could fly him out. What she was trying to do was supposedly someone had put in for an award for him, a Valor Award, and it never went through. And she was trying to track down and get some witnesses and so forth, and to be able to try to get this awarded to him even after he has died. Well, I don't think she's going to be able to be very successful with that because he was in the Navy and this was an Army situation. However, I was able to talk to her a good bit about the situation, and I told her, I said, I would love to be able to help you, but I cannot verify that your brother was there. I mean, I'm not saying he wasn't. I just cannot verify that. Well, as a result, we talked a good bit about his experiences after Vietnam. And so I have sent her a copy of this combat trauma book. Well, she had read the combat chaplain book. That's how she got in touch with me, because she read about that incident. And so her brother John has some adult children, and after I talked to her a little bit about some of my experiences post Vietnam, she said, I would really, really like to be able to help my nephews and nieces. And so I sent her a book, for her to pass on to them. And
the second book, the combat trauma book.
Yeah, the combat trauma book. And so to answer your question, yeah, there are, sort of as needed or as requested. But I used to go out and do a lot of public speaking and so forth. But I do very, very little of that anymore.
Mm.
Because well, primarily because of my neuropathy. It's just very difficult to get around anymore.
Mm. You still follow Wake Forest football?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, in fact, I get something from Wake Forest about every 2 or 3 days. Won't sell tickets or whatever, And
Yeah.
but I have not been to a game at Wake Forest for a good long while. And
Now, how far would that be from Fayetteville?
that would be about 2.5, 3 hours,
Mm.
about the same distance to the Columbia from here.
Right, right. Well, I guess I just have one last question for you. And then, of course, if there's anything you'd like to add, you're welcome to. But I wonder if you could, if you could go back to 1967 and be on that plane about to land in Vietnam for the first time, and you could have a word with the 25-year-old Jim Johnson, what would you tell him?
Be true to yourself and be true to God. Be true to your calling. And I think that's what I would, and keep your head down.
Keep your head down. Yeah, it's not easy when you're 6'5", or what are you,
Yeah,
6'5"?
that's right.
I mean, I was reading the book, and I mean, the situations were not funny at all, but I was just, I couldn't help it. Just because picturing a guy your size trying to squeeze into some of the spaces that you were squeezing into to avoid being shot,
Yeah.
you know, and then making the decision to go back out again the next day or the next, on the next operation. It's like, that those situations weren't built for people of your stature.
No, no. The, missed
Yeah, you may,
and a few mortars and a few uh, B-40 rockets, and so
mm.
just I'm just fortunate, just blessed.
You also were decorated as a
Yes.
result of all this time in combat. I know you received a Bronze Star, and
Well, actually, I was awarded 3 Bronze Stars.
well, your first Bronze Star,
Yeah.
your first Bronze Star ceremony on November 14th, 1967.
Yeah.
I remember the date very well because on the other side of the world, I was being born that day.
Is that right? Is that
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah. Um, I was reading the book, and I just, I couldn't wait to get to November 14th because I was like, I wonder what he was doing. What was Jim doing when I was being born? Well, that was the answer. The answer was you were having your first Bronze Star ceremony. But please go on and talk about, the other decorations that you earned.
Well, I had 2 other Bronze Stars awarded to me. I was written up to be awarded a Silver Star, but the Tet Offensive had begun the last day of January 1968, and on for the next 2 months, I mean, there was no time to take a deep breath, and paperwork was just jam packed, I guess, with the personnel people, and I was written up for a Silver Star, but it must have been lost or who knows what. And frankly, I won't say I don't care, but it doesn't matter, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Because many of my soldiers were not given awards that they were very, very heroic. Uh, and, um, uh, and so if there had been one firefight, okay, and lots of people would have been written up, for awards. But when you have one firefight after the other, after the other, after the other, after the other, whoops, uh, that there was a lot of paperwork that was messed up or didn't get sent to division headquarters. or guys were just not written up like that because we were too busy. Excuse me, just too busy. And so, you know, I'm not bitter about that, you know, uh, you know, you know, I was awarded the Air Medal. Uh, you know, and that's a combat award, and 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 I was put in for an Army Commendation Medal with V device for valor for another situation that never went through.
Hmm.
But that's okay. I mean that's
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting to me because it had not occurred to me before reading your book that you know, that a chaplain would ever be in a position to earn a Bronze Star,
yeah.
much less, you know, 3 Bronze Stars. So, and I don't know whether that's unique or unusual, but it struck me as um, surprising.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you know, I actually, Jim, if you don't mind, I do have one more question. I always kick myself after these interviews when we've hung up and I'm going, you know, through my notes and starting to put the episode together, and I realize that I failed to give you an opportunity, or to give the interviewee an opportunity to acknowledge a partner. Right? You and Barbara have been married for 60 years.
60 years. Mhm.
Yeah, and you know, one of the things I love most about your first book, Combat Chaplain, is the little snippets of letters
Yeah.
that
Mhm.
you write to her. You know, is there anything you want to say about your experience with war, with combat, with PTSD, with you know, uh, uh, as a servant to others? Is there anything that you want to say about Barbara's role in make helping to make all of that possible for you?
Well, she has always been by my side, and I've tried to be by her side too. But she has sort of a sixth sense that you know, if something is bothering me, uh, she doesn't know what it is, but occasionally she will say, is something bothering you?" You know, and that gives me the chance to say whatever I want to say or need to say. And you know, I mean, uh, there's no way that I could ever uh, have had a better partner in life than her. You know, we were in the fifth and sixth grade together, and we didn't date until the ninth grade, and that was just one date. That was a disaster. I won't get into that. But in 11th grade, we started dating, and pretty soon we were serious, and we both felt that this was what uh, we wanted to do, was to get married. Of course, I had to get out of school first, and she did too. And but she is just uh, she's what a wife should be, and you know, I just cannot say enough good about how she has blessed my life over the years and continues to do so. And but we know I'm 80 and she's 80. She will be 81 in 3 weeks, and I will be 81 in September. We know that life as we know it is on very much on the downside, and but we remind ourselves that when the first of us dies, it won't be too long until the other will be able to join us in heaven. We believe that. And the so anyway, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
All right.